So obviously your expertise is history and archaeology.
Yeah.
With that in mind, what do you think we can learn from Leviticus?
Wow. There are in history and archaeology a lot of tremendous law codes written down. You've got Babylonian law codes, laws of Hammurabi, you've got Egyptian law codes written down. A lot of things have survived on temples, etc., etc. You've got to remember, you've got to bear in mind that the Bible is a work of history. So you almost have to engineer that history back to understand what's going on. So you've got this massive crowd of people now that Moses is in charge of, who are all used to being under Egypt, under Egyptian rule, and then the next minute they find themselves out in the desert. So you've got to somehow create a society, create a social structure that's going to work, but it has still got to be relevant to people who are essentially Egyptians. Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, but he's still writing from an Egyptian viewpoint because that's what he is. So he's doing it with that mentality in mind. So we know, for example, that some bits of Leviticus match already existing Egyptian laws and Egyptian texts that you find on tombs, you find on temples. Some of the wording is remarkably similar. But even if the words are the words of God and they're written in the lettering and the writing of God, they still have to come through a human agent. So you've still got to bear this in mind, that although it looks a bit wordy and it looks a bit long-winded, all archaeological law codes are the same the world over. Anything that's survived is difficult to plough through. But in terms of making a foundation, building a foundation for the nation of God, that's where Leviticus sits.
So what should we be looking out for in the archaeological world?
What would you expect to find?
Yeah, what would you expect to find to I guess, prove, or just at least...
Well, the problem that you're going to have with the portable tabernacle is that it isn't going to leave a lot of physical traces. Wherever it's set up, you might, if you're lucky, get a double square where it was that would be in a part of the desert, perhaps, where the desert is never disturbed. Some of these dry places preserve impressions for a very long time. But of the tabernacle itself, anything that's made of metal would probably survive. The timber sides of it, maybe in a dry environment you might get away with it, and perhaps in an extremely dry condition you might get some material.
Do you think it's important for us to look for those kind of things?
People have searched for them, but of course the most famous thing is the Ark, the actual Ark itself. Think Raiders of the Lost Ark, it's that box. There's at least 7 Arks that have been found. One of them was found at Tanis. Another one was found in the tomb with Tutankhamun, so you can actually see what these arks look like. People seem to think the Bible's a work of isolation. They think it's just something that's been put together and it's, it is what it is and that's it.
Yeah.
But that's not the case. A lot of other things that we know for a fact existed, that we have found, a lot of those items support the truth of the narrative of the Bible. They can be brought in and you can do a direct comparison. You can say, okay, we've got 7 arks, different ones, different sizes and shapes look like this. So therefore that would lead you to conclude that the thing that Moses made was very similar to those.
Yeah.
1 or 2 things are not quite the same. The 7-branched lampstand, the menorah, that's more Babylonian than it is Egyptian. So there are twists and turns.
Some carryover from some of the people that...
It's come from somewhere else, the idea of doing it that way. But it's interesting because I'm pretty sure it's around Leviticus that God appoints one guy from the congregation to be in charge of it all, and it's got this lovely little quote where it says, and gave him all artistic abilities. So you've got one fella in charge of putting all this together who really does know his onions, he knows what he's doing, and he pulls influences from, the whole of the ancient world in constructing it.
I thought that was quite an interesting bit of Leviticus actually, about how we're often given the talents that we need to accomplish what God has given us. So maybe there's a lesson there not to stress over the things that we can't do, but kind of level in the things that we can, maybe.
I think if you do get stuck with something, I think I think when the time comes, when it's right to do something, you do find the ability to do it. It's there. But the reverse can also be true. If you do try too hard and the abilities are obviously not there, either it's just not right for you to tackle it at that particular time, or go and find somebody else, go and seek help. And that's another lesson from Leviticus. Moses doesn't kind of stand there with, you know, the 2 tablets of stone and go, right, that's it, I'm boss, I'm doing it all from now on. It's quite the opposite. He's appointing elders, he's appointing craftsmen, he's appointing leaders for the people. He's the entire social structure stems from Moses, and it's a great lesson in delegation, because by the time he's finished, he doesn't have to do anything other than sit in the tabernacle and listen to God. That's where he ends up. You know, he becomes the go-between when everybody else has actually got jobs that they need to get on with.
I heard from a friend the other day that one of the first books he read when he first became a Christian was Leviticus. He didn't really know what he was doing.
So he just dove in.
Picked out Leviticus, and I have to say, I think if Leviticus had been the first book I'd read becoming a Christian, I may have found myself quite soon
going somewhere else.
Losing the newfound faith. So what do you make of all this sacrificing that's going on? And
in the position you had at that point in time, because we think as archaeologists it's about 1500, 1600 BC, it's somewhere in that time frame, and the position you had meant that societies were still in the development stage. Whatever was before them, various kingdoms and empires had risen and fallen, and this is what you're witnessing in Leviticus, is literally the nuts and bolts birth of a new Hebrew orientated society. That's what it is. And I think in some cases some of the laws in Leviticus are more extreme than they would normally be. In other words, once the society is up and running and it's rolling along and all the rest of it, you can modify things and make things happen. But what they're trying to do is get out of one society, which is the Egyptian one, and then develop another one. So the emphasis, the stress in Leviticus is very much on the differences. There's a lot of this where, you will do this and you will not do that, and you have previously been like this, but now you need to be like this. There's a lot of that where there's push and pull. So it's almost like when you bring in a child up, what you put in at the beginning when they're growing up, the first 7, 8, 9, 10 years of their life can be quite harsh and quite severe. But then once they get into the next 10 years of the life, when they're growing up through teenage years, they then kind of take everything you've given them on board and then interpret it for themselves. So Leviticus is literally the very first childhood phase of a nation. And once you realise that, some of it, severe as it is, you can kind of deal with it a bit better, you can cope with it a bit better. An awful lot of Leviticus as well links into what Jesus fulfills in the New Testament. So a lot of the sacrifices are quite a major one there. I think I'm right in saying, I think the number is 96 sacrifices and prophecies to do with sacrifice from the Old Testament are fulfilled as he's hanging on the cross. So as complicated as Leviticus is and as difficult as it is, it prefigures something that happens 1,500 years later. A lot of the finer detail.
In many respects, the events that are going on in Leviticus, if you look at it from that perspective, as God working out his plan towards Jesus through history, this building of the nation, as you've put it, has to serve both them and us, really, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It has to serve the people of the present as they were back then, as well as the people of the future. We needed to be able to look back and relate this to Jesus, but they needed to look at it and relate it to how they moved forward as a people
at the time.
It's obviously like Leviticus had to make sense to the people then, and I think that's one of the things that when we're reading the Bible we often miss, because we're always looking at it through our eyes and how can we relate to this. And I think in many ways that's why a lot of people aren't attracted to the Bible, because they look at things and they think, well, that's That's
how
crazy.
does that possibly apply to us?
That's 2,000 years ago. That's how they lived then. But I think it helps us if we can look at those people and see, well, actually,
put it in context.
How did they look through this?
Yeah.
You know, what lens were they looking?
Where were
through?
they at?
How does this relate? Why would God need to present himself to them in this way? Why would God need to tell them to do things in a particular way? And I think if we can't do that, then, which in some respects I guess I can't, because that's why I look at Leviticus, I read it and I think, no, sorry,
I'm lost.
I think I'll read a New Testament book next. So
you've still got to be careful though, because there's I'm pretty sure it's in Leviticus where you've got all the laws about what animals you can and can't eat, as well as all the sacrifices and everything. And I remember even in my lifetime that somebody came out with this bright idea where they said, well, for example, you know, the reason you can't eat pig is because if you had a pig in the desert and you slaughtered the pig, it would go stale, it would go bad before you could get to it and eat it. Which sounds perfectly plausible.
Yeah.
But now, fast forward to today, which is modern times, obviously 30, 40 years after somebody told me that, we've now discovered that the closest living creature to us, based on DNA, is a pig.
Yeah.
Not a monkey, as Darwin thought sort of 150 years ago, and it's actually a pig. So actually, you're only one chromosome away from cannibalism. That's actually what that is, in real, true scientific terms. Which then sort of flicks a switch and you think, okay, 2,500 years ago, no, 3,500 years ago, how did they know? Because that is a brilliant example of how modern day discoveries, it's not an archaeological one per se, but DNA is part of archaeology now. A discovery like that shines completely new light on something which is actually contained in biblical law. It's almost like an incongruous connection, but yet it's absolutely true. We shouldn't really be eating pigs because they're very, very close to us.
But we need everything explaining to us today.
Yes,
don't
we do. Yeah.
I think we live in a culture where if we can't have it explained, then that's it. Whereas the fact that they didn't need this explaining, it was just God said, look,
this is it, do it.
Yeah, don't eat your pigs.
I'm not going to tell you why, just don't do it.
And I think
in the old...
Do you not think we've lost something though by having this mentality where we do need everything explained?
Again, it's a coin with two sides to it, because there's the one side which, in a way, it should be that God says, this is what you do, so you do it because God said it. You know, obviously God must know better. I mean, if Moses is talking to God face to face and he's relaying this information accurately, why argue with it? That's one side of the coin. But then the other side of the coin, when you flip it over, you actually then do start to realise that the finer content of Leviticus might be worth going through, because actually some of it does have a scientific foundation. It is understandable, but you've got to somehow contextualise it. You have to make sense of it. So rather than saying, okay, the whole of Leviticus, it's just God saying, this is what you're going to do, guys, this is it, you know, and then kind of blanket balling it and binning it because we can't make sense of it. The other side of that coin is that, no, actually, sometimes it's worth just going through it. It is one of these books that you can break into verses. You can break it right down into its finest detail and just tackle one bit and focus on just one verse and think, is that true? Does that weigh up? You know, to modern day, does it still apply? And if it doesn't apply, why doesn't it apply? And if it does, why does it? And again, don't be afraid perhaps to throw some of those bits and bobs out for now and just say, okay, either I don't understand it or I don't think it applies, because it's not 3,500 years ago. You know, it's not 1,500 BC, it's 2000 AD. So we have got to interpret it through that lens. That's how we have to make it apply. But the pig's a good example, because I mean, you could read that and you could just think, oh, I love bacon. You know, somebody told me that it was because the bacon went off in the desert, so you know, I'll just ignore that. Let's just throw out the baby with the bathwater, until someone comes along and says, well, hang on a minute, guys, you know, you're only one chromosome away from a pig. You know, we can use pigs' organs in transplants in humans. You know what I mean? So, should we really be eating them? You know, that's you know, it's another issue, and that's coming from a completely different discipline. It's totally out left field. It's nothing to do with the Old Testament, but like you say, God's still God.
I think a while back you mentioned something about Mount Sinai and the archaeological evidence for.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, that where all this actually takes place geographically. Traditionally, Mount Sinai is the one with St. Catherine's Monastery on it. It's there on the Sinai Peninsula. It's, a big mountain, big monastery, that's it, and that's where everyone's been going. As far as we know, because archaeologically and historically, that establishment's only really been there since about the 4th century, 5th century. So you're looking at the days when hermits were trying to find places to settle, and they settled and they founded the monastery as initially as a hermitage. That's the exact same period where Romans adopt Christianity and they start to relocate the sacred sites on purpose. And it's a bit like the Roman version of the National Trust. So let's say the National Trust have got something in care like Stonehenge, but you can't have 40,000 people a day trampling through it, otherwise it's just going to cease to exist. It'll just get destroyed. So what they did was they produced a decoy, in effect. So what you've got with that monastery on Mount Sinai, etc., that is in fact the decoy. That's where they want to send everybody. If you study scripture and you actually look in scripture, it quite clearly states that the actual mountain is in Arabia. It tells you it's in Arabia. It's on the Arabian Peninsula, which is almost exactly opposite where it is on the other side of the Gulf of Akbar. And that's where it actually is. An Australian archaeologist who's dead now, a guy called Ron Wyatt, was very much into trying to crack these different codes. I mean, he's most famously remembered for not finding the Ark of the Covenant, but by the same token he managed to find Noah's Ark, and he also managed to find Mount Sinai and the crossing site of the Red Sea. And he actually went out and videoed these things in the 1970s and 80s and 90s. I've got a video of the 1980s trip to Mount Sinai, and at the moment it is in Arabia. It's fenced off because the Saudi Arabian royal family have absolute control of archaeological sites. But there is an altar there, and it does have cows painted on it. There is a double impression of what appears to be the site of a tabernacle. There's a huge encampment area there with corn grinding stones and various other artifacts, and then there's this massive, great, huge mountain that's black on top. Now that's the good news. The bad news is there's this massive sign there that says if you trespass on this property, you will die. Basically, the King of Arabia has the right. Saudi Arabia has the right to execute you if you cross this. They have a different attitude to archaeology over there, you see. You enter this site, basically, you're dead. And it is surrounded. There are a couple of guard towers there and one or two other...
So you think that's the explicit reason why you think that...
I think that's the correct location. I do think it's the correct location.
From a knowledge perspective, how widely known or accepted is it amongst the archaeological community that this would be the place to...
I would say that of the archaeologists that know of its existence... I would say a majority of them would accept it. They would find this as an acceptable site. The reasoning behind that is that at the end of the day, the true archaeologist is the guy that lives there. He's the guy that actually has grown up all his life and is utterly familiar with that territory. And in terms of the Sinai Peninsula, in terms of the Gulf of Akbar, in terms of Saudi Arabia, there isn't really an argument over where the original mountain is. It is in Arabia, and it's stated clearly, like I said, in scripture as being in Arabia. So this is the site. As far as the locals are concerned, this is it. This is the proper site. To the point where, like I say, the Saudi Arabian crown has possessed the site and protects it on pain of death. There are an awful lot of biblical archaeologists out there, though, and they've been rowing for hundreds of years over where things are. So, like I say, if you actually contact the archaeological authorities at a given location, they're usually the ones that know where the real sites are.
Do you think something like Leviticus, with all its laws, is essentially it's setting up all those laws and the structure in a way just so that God can break it down with Jesus?
Yeah, he's definitely laying the ground rules for what's coming.
Yeah, because it gives us a sense of what we should do and what needs to be done to make ourselves right with God. But almost in a way, just so that God can say, but I'm going to make it so that you don't actually have to do all this. So it's almost like showing us a glimpse of how hard it would have been, I guess, to get in relationship
to do it by
with him,
law,
and then having God. Obviously, I mean, this is the beauty of the Bible as a whole. I mean, yes, it is separate books from separate time periods, but there's this connection that runs through them. And we go. I think Leviticus for me is this. Like I say, I struggle with it, and it's just. I think because I look at it and I think, well, if this is how we had to make ourselves right with God, if this is how we make our way to Him,
I've had it.
Yeah. I would fail miserably. And I think it's only with the context of having the New Testament, of having the knowledge of Jesus, that I can now look at Leviticus and I can read it and I can actually go, phew, glad I don't have to do all that nonsense.
You can almost engineer it backwards.
Yeah.
So that you can hear Moses actually asking the question. You can almost see him. He's sat there in front of God, and he turns around to God and he says, "So, what do I have to do to be perfect?" And God kind of takes a deep breath and goes, "Right, you've asked for it now. Here it comes, boom, from the results, Leviticus. That's it." And that's God saying, "Okay, this is what you'd have to do, and when you'd have to do it, and how you'd have to do it, if you wanted to be perfect." You know, at which point, by the time you get to sort of Numbers, I would imagine Moses is reeling and thinking, "I wish I'd never asked that stupid question."
It's the biggest regret in human history.
That was a lousy thing to ask God. That was, but at least he knows, and he's written it down. That is the thing with the Bible, really. Most people, you can either approach it and you can read it and you can be realistic and you can think, well, okay, this is God's perfect plan. Which, like you rightly say, only God can ever, make sense out of this. Or you can get hold of the Bible and you go, "Oh, fantastic, a rule book. Let's turn this into a rule book. Let's try and follow this to the letter." As soon as you do that, you're in error, because, as you say, very much like the guys that stoned the poor guy, you've totally missed the point. You've completely and utterly missed the point. The Bible is written by that supreme, perfect, eternal being, basically to tell us how wrong we actually are, not to tell us how we can work our way to being right. So it's back to that horrible question that Moses must have asked at the beginning.
And that's the key question. We think it's us that can make ourselves right, but it's actually Jesus that makes us right.
Yeah, it's all God.
And until we accept that and actually say, well, actually, this isn't a book of rules. It's showing us the rules that we would have if we didn't have Jesus.
Yeah.
But thankfully we do have Jesus, so we can look at the stuff in Leviticus, we can look at the stuff in like Numbers, which obviously is going to come pretty soon after this, and we can say, you know what, phew, thankfully I don't have to deal with that.
It's a balancing act, because some people like to go in the direction of rules because that kind of suits some people, and some people go the other way and abolish all of the rules and just go with the faith only. But actually it's a balance of the two, because you've got to remember the supreme example is Jesus, but the world that he's setting foot in is the world of the Old Testament. Everything that leads up to him being born, him growing up, who he was, how he behaved, everything he did, every prophecy and law and everything that he fulfilled, all of those things are contained in the Old Testament. So in actual fact, the New Testament should really not be called the New Testament. It should be called the end of the Old Testament. Because that's truly what it is. It's not until you get into the church period after Acts, the four Gospels are the end of the Old Testament, really, because that's the society that they're in, that's what they're working with. The New Testament, all the letters and everything that come afterwards, which are only from a very, very tiny time frame, they're only from a matter of tens of years, where the preceding books cover thousands of years. It's the end of the Old Testament. Once you remember that, things like Leviticus suddenly become really, really important, because how are you going to get your head around what Jesus is about? How are you going to understand what he's doing? And these people he's talking to and the teachings and where he goes and how the temple functions and everything, the whole social structure, all of the beginnings of that take you back to Leviticus. Takes you back to them coming out of the desert and coming out of Egypt and settling in the promised land. That's the beginning of it all. So you can't pull those foundation blocks out. You've got to leave them there and go back to them and look at them at some point.